2 months ago, I was talking about Fantasian, a JRPG which I found solid, charming, and rewarding, but also a game which owed most of its press coverage to two facts. One, that its development was led by Final Fantasy's creator and erstwhile steward, Hironobu Sakaguchi. And two, that the development team went to considerable trouble building dozens of dioramas, just to photograph them, digitize them, and then doctor them with layered effects. Doing things the hard way, in the hopes that something tangible and worthwhile would remain of that effort in the end. It's admirable, surely. But also, I know people who played Fantasian and had no idea about the dioramas. The dioramas, after all, were inspired by PlayStation 1 era pre-rendered backdrops, so the finished product was easy to interpret as tasteful nostalgia, even for those ignorant of its laborious production. Why am I bringing up JRPG minutia in my visual novel video? Well, after playing visual novel 428 Shibuya Scramble, I found myself watching a making-of featurette and learned that the cast had acted out the entire scenes on location in Shibuya while it was populated with normal foot traffic. Impassioned vocal deliveries, full-on chase scenes, only to have the finished work retain almost nothing but still photos. Sometimes a montage of photos, but still, so much effort to end up almost entirely hidden from the player. In the featurette, Narumi Konno, the actress who plays twins Hitomi Osawa and Maria Osawa, talked about the challenge of playing the more reserved Hitomi when she felt like Maria was closer to her real-life self. Konno's likeness, her expressions, make it into the game, and Hitomi's words, the script, made it into the game. But so much of Konno's performance, I don't even know if it made it to the cutting room floor or just evaporated into the Shibuya sky during shooting. I've played a few visual novel games over the years, or at least visual novel adjacent games over the years. A few of the Phoenix Wright games, for example, the obligatory Doki Doki Literature Club, and I want to say even Obsidian's Pentiment counts as a visual novel, despite considerable stylistic differences. And having said all that out loud, I don't know why I doubted my ability to enjoy 428 Shibuya Scramble. I enjoyed all those games. Doki Doki is probably my least favorite of them. Still definitely positive on it. Pentiment I enjoyed enough that right after I finished it, I went to the public library and picked up Umberto Eco's The Name of the Rose, which is the major historical literary inspiration for it. And honestly, the fourth and fifth cases in the original Phoenix Wright, I loved even more than that. I was completely enraptured. I think the worst I can say for visual novels is that I am very rarely in the mood for them and don't have a very big appetite for them. For example, after I played the first Phoenix Wright game, I was on such a high that I immediately picked up Justice for All, the second Phoenix Wright game, and sputtered out almost immediately. I generally need games with more meat on their bones, even though I like visual novels every now and then. But speaking of now and then, it's been 3 years since I played Pentiment, so the time was right. On the subject of Catholicism-adjacent historical fiction, I am also reminded of Ridley Scott paying Edward Norton to appear in Kingdom of Heaven, and then sticking him behind a mumble mask for the duration. On the one hand, you think, maybe a much cheaper actor could have raised an arm and worn a mask, but on the other, maybe there's something there that only Edward Norton could have provided, even so obscured. Something comes through. And here, too, in 428 Shibuya Scramble, that decadent, impassioned heart comes through. This is a game that has you switching between 5 protagonists as their stories repeatedly intersect and affect each other over the course of one exceedingly long and traumatic day. It's necessarily a playful scenario, with the intersecting stories mirrored on screen in both a cat's cradle and in Shibuya Crossing itself, the world's busiest 5-way pedestrian intersection. You've got a rookie detective with a heart of gold, in a little over his head, a former gang leader burning with unfound purpose, a lively girl trapped in a broken mascot costume, a depressed virologist trapped in his house and his marriage, and a manic freelance journalist who puts the extra in extra extra read all about it. That last character, Minoru Minorikawa, might be the one best served by the game's format of photos and silent text, because I can absolutely imagine the character being overly obnoxious if given voice, and the relative muting provided by still images allows his passion to come through without suffocating the player. Several characters in the story are immensely charming, with great chemistry. The burgeoning, imperiled romance between street tough Achi and quietly brave Princess Hitomi really had me hooked. But Minorikawa is the game's decadent, impassioned heart as a human being. the lengths he goes to save both his incompetent mentor and his incompetent trainee, even as largely unrelated world-ending plot elements are unfolding around them, goes from curious to absurd to perfect as the game approaches its climax. There are bomb plots, bioterrorism, literal life and death stakes, and Minorikawa is tying himself in knots trying to figure out exactly how much tough love his neurotic underling needs to become her best self. He is journalist as superhero. Just look at these poses. For many in the 428 Shibuya Scramble cast, journalist Minorikawa, Good Samaritan Achi, even conman Yanagishita in a way, the only thing superheroic about them is their will. They are fundamentally unexceptional people, but simply refuse to give up in what they believe in. It's a little silly, but heartwarming. The game's biggest problem, meanwhile, is its actual superheroics, courtesy of the mysterious Middle Eastern teen combat prodigy Kanan, a character who is supposed to be an acquaintance of the girl whose kidnapping sets off the day's events, but just does not mesh with the rest of the game's tone. It feels a bit like a Dungeons & Dragons group where one barely tolerated player turns up with a pre-made character sheet with a level 1 vampire assassin who has a +5 katana that steals the soul of everyone it cuts. It's a bit much. The good news is that Kanan's role in the story is pretty incidental for most of the game's runtime, until the climax, when the ridiculousness of the character concept threatens to take over the game. It's a little hard to understand what possessed the writer to insert Kanan. As I understand it, after looking into the game's production, most of the game's plot and characters were the creation of Yukinori Kitajima, but the Kanan character was the creation of a different writer and was incorporated into the story as a backdoor pilot in order to set up an anime series that I will never watch and have no interest in because it's about this ridiculous character who is only of any note because her presence worsens the finale of what is otherwise a really gripping, charming story that is too good for her nonsense. Even if certain aspects of the climax are unsatisfying thanks to this backdoor pilot, every character still gets a fairly satisfying payoff to their own arc, and the game's panache really elevates it. The gameplay is pretty threadbare. You reveal and then untangle the cat's cradle that is the game's narrative bit by bit, making decisions with each of the 5 characters in such a way as to avoid misfortune for them and also avoid indirectly dooming the other protagonists. In the first hour, it was hard to understand what exactly the game wanted out of me, to understand how the different threads did or didn't connect to each other, but by the second hour, I found untangling the game to be natural and satisfying. It's not deep gameplay, nor is it particularly challenging, and repeating these slow-scrolling story segments to explore alternate branches is undeniably tedious, but the game is sufficiently charismatic and gripping that I honestly don't mind. Based on 428 Shibuya Scramble, I would definitely try another Spike Chunsoft visual novel like the Zero Escape or Danganronpa series. 428 even has a spiritual prequel game called Machi, but that's a Japanese-only Saturn game, so I'm going to have to pass on that, at least for now. If 428 is anything to go by, Spike Chunsoft has got an unexpectedly good handle on presentation and character, and at the very least, none of Spike Chunsoft's other visual novels involve Kanan, so there's that. Up next, I finish off my third bingo line with a sports game. I have no real affection for any particular sport, so I hereby throw myself on the mercy of the wisdom of crowds and try playing literally the highest rated sports game of all time, Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 3. It feels arbitrary to me that this would be the third entry in particular, but once you're committed to blindly following Metacritic, there's just no room for critical thought, is there? I'm coming into this as somebody who can't name any tricks other than grind and ollie and various numbers that are multiples of 180, but I trust the crowd and I will do my level best.